Beg your pardon? Meredith, who is this coarse person with the foreign accent?
I think we're in a very different place where great powers are trying to outmaneuver one another. And so we're not really at war, but we're not really at peace. Now, the frustration is this war has now been going on for 4 years next October, and we still are not in the kind of mobilization that we need, whether in the United States or whether in Europe.
All right, here we go. Hey, big moment. More than usual. I always say take out your maps on this little podcast, but now more than ever, we're honored to have the host of the, I would say, sublime podcast, the Defense and Aerospace Report, and editor-in-chief of the publication of the same name, Vago Muradian. Welcome.
Danny, it's an honor and pleasure to be joining you on the Talking Ass. I think when it came to picking great names, you've done that. I appreciate the kind words. I appreciate that you're a listener, and it's an honor and pleasure to be here with you. Thank you.
Hey, that's very kind of you. It's biblical, that name. Did you figure it out, or?
I figured it out. Well done. Sublime in its own right, Danny, some would say.
The thing is, so either people think I'm still like a 17-year-old, or they think I'm some kind of literary genius. I'm neither. I'm happy. I'm proud that you figured it out.
Well, listen, it's very, very clever, and I think what you do is really neat. And in our conversations, they've really been fascinating. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, some of them have been fascinating. The ones where other people speak. The ones where I speak, they get out of hand pretty quickly. Can we start with the name? Because that rolls off the tongue. Vago Muradian. It's got gravitas. That's Armenian, right?
It is Armenian. My mother and father are both Armenians. My dad was from Soviet Armenia. He was a prolific classical composer, and he came to the United States in 1950 and became a very proud American. And my mom was from British Cyprus. Her family originally was from Anatolia, and during the Armenian genocide were driven from their homes and then eventually ended up in Cyprus, courtesy of the British Empire, where they restarted their lives. When the British flag came down on Cyprus, they decided to emigrate to the United States, and my mom and dad met in New York City. And then I came along and grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. My mom's side of the family was in the New York area. My grandmother and my aunts were all in America. We had one cousin from my father's side, and the rest of the family was in the Soviet Union, where my uncle was one of the most prominent poets in the former Soviet Union, Gevorg Emin. So, literary, creative family. My mom was a consular officer at the U.S. mission to the UN. So, grew up with a very international polyglot academic. My dad was, not just a composer, but was a music teacher and prominent in music circles. My godmother was a famous opera singer, Lucina Mara, where she sang in the Metropolitan Opera for a long time. So it was a great childhood on the Upper West Side of Manhattan.
And thank you. Our co-host Sylvia did want to ask you about the women in the family as well, because all the men have Wikipedia pages and they're famous. Easy to find out information about them, but basically everyone in your family is famous. Women too.
I don't know about that, but yes, like on the Armenian side of things, and my mom was a terrific mom, and she was very, very accomplished as well. So, lucked out on both sides of the family on that one.
Are you the number one Muradian though now? Don't be shy.
I don't know if I can say that, Danny. I don't know if I can say that. I'm certainly the number one Muradian on this podcast. So
yes.
I've got that going for me.
Although if you know any of the others, just send them in. We'll love to talk to all of them. But so I'm assuming you didn't go into music, but you learned an instrument, right? Let me guess, piano.
Piano and violin. And of course, there was no escaping my music teacher, who was my dad, who played violin, viola d'amore, and piano. And that just came from his curiosity to learn, as much as he could about as much as he could. So I think I picked that up from my dad. But whenever we got into a cab, my dad knew 7 or 8 languages, was fluent in them, and he was just extremely well read, as you would imagine, sort of a music professor. He had a knack for interviewing the cab driver whenever we were in a cab, and understanding the political dynamics in Nigeria at the time and what was going on, and so I think I picked up my knack for interviewing people from him, because he always knew, but would always ask a smart question about the dynamics in the country and what the drivers were and things like that. So I mean, every cab ride or every engagement or every visit to a pizzeria, he would strike up a conversation with somebody, and we would end up learning something from that. So I think I didn't pick up as much of the music stuff from him, even though we learned piano and violin. But I think I did learn a thing or two about interviewing and asking questions, and always trying to learn about something I don't know about. So every day is an opportunity to learn.
Yes, that example is amazing that your dad used that you said Nigeria, because I've used for years as a joke with my partner when I get into a conversation with a taxi driver or someone else, and usually in the language she may not speak. She asks me, what were you talking about again? And I always say as a joke, the economics of Nigeria.
Well, but what was the deal about my dad is it didn't matter what the country was. He just always knew something important about it and that was current. And I would just always, sort of marvel at, how the hell does he know what the Guinea-Bissau, north-south dynamic is? And yet, my dad was on that.
Yeah, well, nowadays, we'll get to that in a moment. Armenian, though, one question about that, just a rapid fire. Give us like a couple of foods and a couple of holidays that are done differently or something. I feel like most people, especially in Europe, we don't really know what Armenian culture is.
Look, I mean, I think all of the foods in that region have a lot of similarities, right? Whether you go from a Greek interpretation of it or a Turkish interpretation of it or an Iranian or then, Afghan. So, I mean, that belt has got lots of, kebabs. Lahma bajin in Arabic is lahmacun in Armenian. There are fish dishes and meat dishes and, desserts. And, one of the things that's kind of unique is they're walnuts. They're not pickled. They're in syrup. So they're walnuts that become just soft over time in the canning process, and they're delicious when you put it on stuff. And then there's sucuk, which is meat, and they're Armenian sausages. But they also have sweet sucuk, which is walnuts as, sort of the kernels of it, and they're dipped in sort of a sugared grape juice, and it forms like a sweet sausage, so that's really, really neat. And, when I was a kid, and occasionally relatives would come from Soviet Armenia, back when, Danny, you could bring stuff like that into America, or at least, maybe they were smuggling it into America. But anyway, so those would be kind of like delicacies, which now I think you can find somewhat more easily. Holiday-wise, Easter's the same time. Christmas is different. It's on January the 6th, and of course Independence Day and things like that. But
So like the Russian Orthodox Church.
they could never agree, right? So I think what the Greeks are on the 7th, the Armenians are on the 6th, and then everybody else is on the 25th. So, but I mean, we would celebrate, right? When everybody is celebrating Christmas on December the 25th, we would celebrate Christmas on December the 26th. We got an extra one on the 6th, but not as, I grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood, and I thought Hanukkah with 8 days of gifts was just great. But then, friends would tell me like, well, we get 8 smaller gifts. You get like big gifts. Yeah.
Yeah. We Jews, we get a little dreidel.
I made it out of clay.
Yeah. So you grew up in the Upper West Side. Being Armenian is a big part of you, but you're also very American. So you got into this field of defense journalism, though. Why did you have an interest in that, or did you just find a story and it was like an accident that you fell into it?
Well, ever since I was a kid, right? I mean, I grew up during the Cold War, during the space race, and the Vietnam War was on. All of this was on TV, and sort of, always wanted to be a reporter covering national security because I thought that was really, really neat. My, mom was working at the UN, the Intrepid. USS Intrepid, the World War II aircraft carrier, came to New York and opened in 1982. So I volunteered on the Intrepid to learn as much as I could about the military services and the Navy in particular at that time. But, I was interested in space and I was interested in airplanes. And, my dad was a tanker in the Soviet Army and in the World War II. I mean, he was actually on the front line when Barbarossa began on June 22nd, at least where he was, and, kind of his wartime experiences and the wartime experiences of the guys that he worked with, even though he was a classical composer, as you can imagine, Danny, classical composer in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, was a time for more modern music and stuff like that. So he also worked as a graphic artist. And so everybody he worked with were veterans of the U.S. military, who I came into contact with and tried to learn from each of them. To me, it was just really, really neat. And because of the New York City waterfront, ships from around the world would always be coming in. So I had experience on Dutch ships and German ships and Japanese ships and British ships. I remember I was in high school and because I'd visited so many of the ships that had gone down to the Falkland Islands, I sort of felt like I had a connection to things that were going on down there, and then managed to get aboard the Hermes when she was in New York after the war and after a big NATO exercise, and spent 15 hours aboard the ship talking to Royal Marines and what their experiences were like, and I incorporated that into my high school paper on the Falkland Islands War. And so after that, I'd already been working for the high school paper, and I was a photographer. And so anyway, all of those things sort of came to a head, and, sort of like saying, hey, this is what I wanted to do. Let me get seriously into, getting into defense journalism. And so that's what I did.
Yeah. All right. I apologize to you and to myself and all the listeners that now we have to do some heavy stuff, because that was
Wow.
lovely. But what about the war? Let's start. Yeah, I've been writing like some of these questions down, not just for you, by the way, to all kinds of like friends and other people I happen to know that are close to power. Like, how do I formulate this? But I'll try. So right now, what are we in as the planet, as the world? What do you think we're in, or what are the generals saying? Is it a World War III? Has it started? Cold War II? What's this current security situation called?
Well, it's a fascinating new great power era. We can discuss, what the American administration is doing. I've categorized it as superpower suicide. It's very rare that somebody who, created this global order out of chaos to prevent another, bout of chaos and to generate a rules-based order move as rapidly away from that rules-based order, which aligns very nicely with what the other illiberal nations in the world want to do. They don't want to be constrained by this world order. You could argue the Soviets were part of the creation of it by being the victors with the United States, Britain, and the Allies in World War II. But they, too, don't want to be constrained, or at least Vladimir Putin doesn't want to be constrained as he works to recreate the lost Soviet empire. Or lost Russian Empire. Throughout history, and even the Soviet Union was interested in these imperial wars and kind of got itself into a little bit of trouble. And certainly the Chinese attitude has been, well, we shouldn't be beholden to this world order, we didn't help create, and therefore, are trying to supplant it, even though they benefited from that global rules-based order to create a Chinese economy that's lifted more people out of poverty. I would also argue the rules-based order maintained more peace for more people to allow more economic prosperity than at any other point in human history. So I think we turn our back on some of these lessons at our peril, that, international rules matter, norms matter. And indeed, we've been sort of convincing even the Chinese that these rules matter, even if they didn't necessarily want to live by them. So where are we? there are those who would argue, and I think the former Commandant in the Marine Corps, General Bob Neller, used to say, many years ago that he thought that we have been sort of at war in cyberspace and in, sort of the gray zone for a long time. And you can argue that we are in, every war looks different from the one that came before it, right? So there's a tendency of people looking at it as, well, this was World War I and this is World War II and this is what world wars look like. And now these conflicts look different. There are cyber means to wage them. There are attributional concerns, right? I mean, who do you retaliate against when you don't know where the nuclear weapon is coming from, right? It's okay if it's an ICBM and we know it and we're tracking it and we saw where it's coming from, and so we know who to launch a retaliation against. But now the Russians have been talking about doing something that was, the great Admiral Gorshkov in the Soviet Union sort of vetoed these ideas of large nuclear-powered, nuclear-tipped torpedoes. So we'll park a nuclear torpedo off of Georgetown, maybe in the Potomac River. Good luck finding that.
Or anywhere, right?
Or anywhere, right? But you could park it in the Thames alongside the Belfast, for all you know, right? So I think we're in a very different place where great powers are trying to outmaneuver one another. And so we're not really at war, but we're not really at peace. And we can each do a lot of damage to the other short of, right? I mean, through cyber means, get dams to fail, get power grids to fail, water systems to fail, all of which is very, very different than anything that we've experienced before. Or the fact that all of these tools can be brought to bear in ways that make things very difficult, whether they're actions in space, whether they're actions in cyberspace. There's a lot of focus on the quantum revolution and what that might mean, right? That all of a sudden there's no encryption. You can beat pretty much any encryption that exists now. And so, you've got all of these technological developments that are happening as well as just straightforward military developments. I mean, the frustrating element, I think, for a lot of people in national security, and I would speak for myself on this, is at the end of the day, despite all of these other means, there still is an opportunity for war, as we've seen with Russia's war on Ukraine. It is the largest war in Europe. It has already caused 1 million Russian casualties by some estimates. It has caused hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian casualties. And yet this war, we'll see how it ends, but it doesn't appear abundantly clear that either side wants to end it. Vladimir Putin's demands remain relatively unchanged as we record this. He's saying either the Ukrainians give me that territory or I'm going to take it. So it doesn't really indicate that he's interested in giving anything up. And all the pressure is on the Ukrainians for the Ukrainians to give up and agree to all these terms, as we saw in the 28-point plan. Okay, well, the Chinese have said, I'm taking Taiwan, whether it's by force. I mean, you could capitulate, or I'm going to have to take you by force. So there could be a force element of it. Okay, well, if that happens, then, the Japanese prime minister is on record, as well as others, saying, well, that would be casus belli for us to get involved. And then once they get involved, we get involved, right? I mean, so when people say, the Chinese used to occasionally say to me, well, but it's the Philippines. And I'm like, they're treaty allies. So you shoot at the Philippines, we're at war. And they couldn't understand that. Like, why would you do that? The Filipinos are irrelevant. I'm like, well, they're not really irrelevant. We have an alliance with them, you see. So, and to them, it was like, well, that's ridiculous, right? This is how World War I happened. Yeah, World War II too. Britain didn't have to go to war, but it felt like it had to go to war because it had an alliance with Poland at the time. So that was the trigger. So anyway, I think we're in a place where it's neither hot, it's not cold, and we're economically cooperating, which is a different element in this. There are nations that are still buying Russian energy, even though Russia is the biggest threat to Europe. By the way, this happened throughout the Cold War. I always found the circular trade, with us acquiring titanium from the Russians in order to build SR-71s to spy on the Russians to be kind of pretty amazing. But alas, we did it. So,
well, there's a lot of that hypocrisy going on where people buy oil from Russia, give them money to fight a war that we're sanctioning them for and all that.
Correct.
And with this cold versus hot war thing, it depends on who you are, right? I view it as that the edges of our Western alliance. So Israel, no matter what people think of that whole conflict on a micro basis, Israel versus Palestine, but if you zoom out, it's clearly one edge of the Western alliance on the edge of Asia. And then you have the Ukraine, which is another edge. And maybe ethnically, people also view them as edge because they're Slavs and they're Jews, and the both groups have been sort of not very liked in Central Europe at various times. But the next hot war will probably be, right, Suwalki Gap or Baltic countries, maybe Finland. Now we're talking suddenly you're economically, politically, maybe even ethnically closer to people who you view as the core of the alliance, right? So isn't this salami tactics? Russia is, and China and Iran, other adversaries, are slowly making the war hotter and hotter, closer to the heart of the alliance.
Well, yeah, but I mean, if you're Vladimir Putin, look, democracies get caught with their pants down often, to use your parlance, right? So we kind of knew what the threats were, but we whistled past those graveyards over and over again, right? Well, there are ways to deal with Putin. He's not really a good guy, but they're buying my luxury goods. I'm buying his energy. It's cheaper for me. I have a whole bunch of other drains on my society. I promised people medical care. That's kind of expensive. Wow, the Americans are out competing us. So we have to find, so there are always 101 reasons why we didn't do it. By the way, we also asked our allies and partners to go to war against terrorism, then to go to war in Afghanistan, then to go to war in Iraq. So that consumed generations of modernization, right? Because every country wanted to be ready when they joined these missions that then became NATO or international partnership missions. And we didn't do all of the things that we needed to do to prepare against the Russians. And my mentor, the late great Andy Marshall, was tracking where the Chinese are going to be 30 years ago and saying, hey, there's a whole bunch of things we need to do. It was Bob Work, if you remember, who, when he was Deputy Defense Secretary, very clearly made the case that the Chinese, are not just out sticking us, as he put it, but they're also making more sticks. Okay. And yet, that was almost 20 years ago, Danny. And, here we are without having invested sufficiently to build up capability. Now, we have tremendous reservoirs of capability. I mean, it's incredible how much we've provided to the Ukrainians, how much the United States has provided allies and partners, supported and defended Israel against Yemeni and Iranian attack, managed to bomb the Iranians as well in the course of this. So, I mean, we have very, very deep reservoirs of capability. But even we are now saying, okay, well, wait a minute, we really now have to bolster our magazines for the challenges that we face in the Indo-Pacific. I mean, just in this Houthi defending, shipping, and protecting Israel, I mean, we shot like 1,000 or 1,100 Standard missiles that we need for an Indo-Pacific fight at the end of the day. So the dynamic is a changing dynamic, but as democracies, we have a tendency of not preparing for them and being caught on the back foot. Now, the frustration is this war has now been going on for 4 years next October, and we still are not in the kind of mobilization that we need, whether in the United States or whether in Europe. And especially if the United States is going to cozy up to Russia for purposes of making money, where we find ourselves in a position where the United States is buddy-buddy with Moscow, and Moscow continues to threaten everybody in Europe at the end of the day, right? Which is going to be a different dynamic that's going to drive Europeans to have to spend a lot more money that arguably they may not have in order to better protect themselves. So we're kind of going into a complicated dynamic, and great powers have their sphere of influence. I think we've heard people in the administration say that. Russia has its sphere of influence, and great powers should respect each other's spheres of influence, is certainly a school of thought that's espoused by some. So the whole notion of all nations, great and small, have a vote, the fact that that's ruled us for the last 80 years might not be the case for the next 8.
Seems like it's over, right? Seems like it's the same old teams. And it's a bit disappointing. I don't know, maybe not disappointing, just interesting that when I was doing a degree in politics and international relations and all that stuff, there were still competing theories of how the world works. There was realism and all these others that had more to do with liberal international order, even cultural Marxist theories. You know how all of those things probably to some extent do affect how countries behave, but it seems like it's now gone back to basics. It's realpolitik, as in competition for resources, and then it's ethnic divisions. So it's the same old teams, Sunni versus Shia, Russia, China, America, and their blocs. And it seems like it's gone to the simple Cold War equations again.
Well, I mean, it's even before Cold War equations, right? I mean, because at least during the Cold War, our sense was we're maintaining all these alliances and these partnerships and pulling nations closer to us, turning a blind eye to things, for example, that Japan did during the war, right? I mean, you could argue there was greater accountability for Germany, but there was a little bit less accountability for Japan at the end of the day, because we realized what the pressures and the tension were, and we were standing up to the Soviets. And so we still were abiding by the rules of the global order that we had created. Now, my concern is this is a little bit like putting toothpaste in a tube. The United States created this, and the circumstances that put the United States in the leadership position was winning the world's greatest hot war with a nuclear bomb and asserting itself on the global stage and getting everybody else to go along with these rules. If you dynamite these rules and you scatter everybody, that doesn't make you stronger at the end of the day. It just makes it a lot more complicated, because then all the smaller countries you need to be in your corner may not feel like you're in their corner. And as a consequence, when you really need them, it may become kind of a problematic and purely transactional thing, which you don't want to get to. I understand the logic of that these nations are all taking advantage of you, and you've got to treat them roughly, and big countries have more power than small countries. By the way, ask any small country that's ever negotiated against the United States whether or not we have more power. We always had more power, and we would muscle nations around all the time, including our allies. But it was selective and was not necessarily the ingoing position all the time, was to sort of squeeze play or hammer everybody. So, I mean, we're in a little bit of a different place as we go into this. And the question is, what does this look like, right? I mean, after what's already happened, what do things look like in 3 years? By the way, I'm not judging this. I'm trying to be clinical in how I'm looking at it. Okay, well, we've done an X number of things over the last year. There are going to be more things we're going to do, right? I mean, we're driving toward a Ukraine settlement that we view, or at least the administration views, as to be in America's interests, which is Russia's a big market with 144 million people, and they've got things we want, right? I mean, the rare earths that we want from Ukraine are not in the Ukrainian, they're in Russian hands. So you could argue there are a lot of very good reasons why we've got to buddy up to the Chinese, right? This whole idea of a reverse Kissinger. I need to get the Russians aboard to help me against China. I think that's a fool's errand. I don't think the Russians are ever going to be in our corner against China. But I mean, they believe that. Okay, well, so what do things look like in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years as a consequence of all of this? I think they're going to look different.
Yeah. Just to clarify what you said earlier about democracies and being caught pants down. Well, we all know about pants down on this podcast, but is it everything that we're short on right now? Because everything is bad news all the time when it comes to our actual readiness to fight these different wars. Are we behind on? Well, we're not behind on AI chips, right? NVIDIA is still king, but are we behind on artillery shells, drones, cyber warfare, everything? I'm wondering, because Professor Michael Clark, who does the Ukraine analysis on Sky here in the UK, he said something interesting. He said, like, at the end of the day, nobody has won this war with cyber and drones yet, 4 years into it. So is it still actual artillery shells that we need, and the Chinese are just way ahead of that, and the Russians, or is it everything?
Yeah. So it's everything, right? If you look at Iraq and Afghanistan, even the number of MRAPs and vehicles we were losing a lot of equipment. and a lot of people were being wounded. I mean, it's only because we created great mechanisms with the golden hour to save lives. Otherwise, their casualties would have been a lot higher. And there were a lot of casualties. It's just that they didn't die. We managed to save a lot of lives, even if those lives were injured, traumatic brain injury, something that we didn't notice, and indeed may be a causal factor in some of the suicides, for example, that we're seeing, that people are taking their lives, years after a conflict. So, I mean, it's that these conflicts have all taken a toll on people, even if it's not as obvious to some people. I mean, at the end of the day, Danny, yeah, wars consume vast amounts of people and equipment. And I think that we sort of talked ourselves into, in the West, especially after the Cold War, you can have boutique-sized armies. You don't really need that many tanks. You don't need that many airplanes. The airplanes are really, really good. F-35 is a tremendous airplane, but they're going to get damaged. I mean, I play in these war games where hundreds of these jets are destroyed on the ground, right? I mean, so assuming like once they get in the sky, they're stealthy and they can do a whole bunch of things. But if you can nail these aircraft on the ground and you don't have enough revetments to put them in, then they get damaged and they're not particularly useful. So, yeah, I don't think we have enough long-range missilery to reach out and touch our adversaries the way that we need to do it. I think the Ukrainians deserve a lot of credit with Flamingo, 1-ton warhead, very long range, very cheap. So, everybody in the West has been talking about the lessons the Ukrainians can learn from us very arrogantly, as opposed to looking at what are the lessons we could be learning from the Ukrainians. Some of them is about plentiful drones. But on the other hand, in the Indo-Pacific, you need longer range weapons, right? I mean, some of this work on a static battle line because neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians have been able to achieve air supremacy. So as a consequence, a whole bunch of little drones are actually a cheap supplement to artillery. Once it was 50-50 drones and artillery. Now it's 80% drones. It's about 15% artillery, and it's about 5% direct fire. And the drones now are like $200 a drone. So they're way cheaper than an artillery shell, even, right? A little bit slower, doesn't have the speed of response that you have out of artillery, but vulnerabilities are contained. And oh, by the way, you can use those drones in a whole variety of other ways, including takedown aerial threats and Shaheds and things like that. So we're in a learning period, but pretty much everything you think you need in a war against the Russians, you may need. And so that's the hard part is the Russians, the minute they're done with this war, they're looking to increase production and they're going to be focused. They're going to be tanned, rested, and ready for the next thing. And we've got to be able to prepare for that. Do I think NATO air forces make all the difference? Absolutely. We will maintain air superiority, and that's going to be a key part of it. But Europe also does not have a lot of air and missile defenses. They're dependent on the United States for that.
And of course, there's obvious reasons, right? We have a couple, there's the peace dividend and all this. Like, people love not investing in defense because we need the money. We think we need the money more for other stuff. But right now, what I said about the edges of our alliance, right? They know, the Ukrainians and the Israelis, what it feels like to have missiles raining down on your cities. It's just hard in democracies to ramp up that production because there's no political will. We don't feel the fact that our taxpayer pounds or euros are in this war already. We don't feel that. Like, you'd have to have something hit the island or hit Central Europe for people to really support this, right? So democracies lag behind because of that.
Well, it's also proximity, right? If you're Finland, look, I mean, part of this is also treasuries. I'm going to tie this back to Finland in a second. Western nations don't like to stockpile stuff because treasuries look at this as excess inventory. So why is it that France or Germany, has enough stocks of ammunition for like 10 days or whatever it is? Britain is better off than other countries, but even it doesn't have the kind of stockpiles that it needs. And it's what I think is hilarious is when you ask Finnish officials, do you have enough artillery shells and weapons? They're like, yeah, we're not going to have a shortage of artillery shells. Okay. Why? Finland is right on that border. All 800 kilometers of it is exposed.
1,300. Vago, I can't believe I got to correct
you. 800 miles. Excuse me. Correction. Yes. 800 miles, right? Sorry about that. Kilometers. I don't even know what those are. 800 miles.
I know. What are they?
So to your point, anybody who's on that border feels it, whereas, if you're in Spain or you're in Portugal, you might not feel it as much. If you're Denmark, you'll feel it a little bit because you're on the Baltic. But I do think that everybody who has an exposure is getting serious about how to solve it. Now the question is how you get that agility, that speed, and produce things in volume that you're going to need, understanding that whatever you think you need will change. I mean, think about what the Ukrainians needed in the beginning of this war and what they need now, right? There now millions of drones a year are being produced that are being tailored, and the Ukrainians are very adult about saying, this was a great capability 6 weeks ago. In 6 weeks, things on the battlefield has changed because the Russians are, an adaptive adversary. So, okay, the thing you were making might not be as useful as what you're going to need 6 weeks from now. So the whole thing is, do you have an agile enough system to generate what you need in volume at the time you need it? And these are all things that we're not yet doing as an alliance. We're not making the things we need as quickly as we need them, understanding that we will also have to change in the course of these wars. And that's certainly the case in whatever we're going to do in the Indo-Pacific, because, any longer range weapon is bigger and heavier and more expensive than any shorter range weapon is. So this is less about a multiplicity of tiny drones being used, but more sort of, okay, they're going to be striking us at range. We're going to need to defend against that, and we're going to be able to do counterstrike. And the other guys had a decades-long lead on us in stockpiling equipment that they can shoot at us. So, okay, you got to put your big boy pants on.
Yeah. One of the guests on your show, recent, actually said something really interesting about this democracy versus authoritarian regime or planned economy, which is the actual defense procurement has an issue where we're also hampered by this, like in capitalism, in the American system, you're buying and selling shiny stuff and trying to convince people to buy potentially expensive things they don't need. Whereas in those countries, they can just tell their people, give the specs and say, go make. And they don't care like what it costs or what the competition is. I guess in capitalism or in America, we have this image of a general going to one of those defense expos that I'm sure you frequent, and then being sold stuff by a sleazy salesman that we don't need.
Look, that's just, I think, a gross oversimplification. Well, no. I mean, look, think about it. So the F-35 always comes up as, everybody's sort of target on this. It's extraordinary. It was able to do things. I mean, there were Israeli F-35s flying over downtown Tehran for 12 days. Okay? And there's nothing the Iranians could do about it. And the Iranians had better air and missile defenses than anybody else. And the Israelis used F-35s to completely dismantle those air and missile defenses. It has proven to have greater range, greater capability, greater survivability than any other jet that's out there. But it's expensive. But proportionately, given other airplanes on the market, it's not that much more expensive. I mean, it's more expensive to fly, but it has a hell of a lot more capability. I mean, so what I'm saying is it's not that easy. You're going to have to establish air supremacy somehow. If there's an easier way to establish air supremacy, I think people would be all for it. There's no easy way to establish air supremacy in these kind of contested battle spaces. All of the loyal wingman and collaborative combat aircraft are promising but unproven. But we do know if you sent the United States Air Force or the Israel Air Force or the Royal Air Force or a NATO that has these nations and this capability under one flag, whether they're Finnish F-35s or Norwegians or Danish ones, combined with German ones and other air forces and the way that everything is integrated, you will be able to establish air superiority and then maintain a freedom of maneuver on the ground that keeps you from ending up in a war like Ukraine does. So it's not all cheap. There is some stuff that can be cheap. The problem with the United States is we're a Six Sigma country. Everything we are trying to do to the highest order and with the most oversight and with the least risk. And that's why things end up being more expensive. I give a compliment to the administration They're trying to take greater risk, move faster, develop more things more quickly, and field them more quickly, and don't get stuck on, we get into a lot of cul-de-sacs, Danny, that end up costing us more money. We specify success rates that are idiotic. I mean, the Israelis would never go, many countries would not go with almost like 100% operational availability rates. And it's just, it's crazy to test for that. Take greater risk. Try it. Okay, it didn't work. The Israelis will regularly tell you this new system is 50% better. It doesn't have to be 100 or 200% better. It's 50% better than the older generation, but we're going to keep introducing new versions of it, and eventually it'll be better, and then we'll scrap all of them and we'll go to a new generation. Or keep using older equipment that's perfectly fine for a lesser use. Right? I mean, I think that we need to change how it is we do business more broadly. But I think that folks get hung up on this and somehow think there's the totally cheap and cheery way of doing this. That's not entirely true, especially if you want to be able to fly big airplanes with 30,000-pound bombs into enemy airspace and take out heavily defended targets. Yeah. Now, the where I'm critical is, great. So let me see if I get this straight. We have $2 billion bombers that are totally unique, that can carry 60,000 pounds of weapons each transcontinentally, but we only built 20 of the bombs that we need to do the job. That's a bigger problem. Yeah. That's the kind of stuff that makes you just, that's where I kind of lose my mind. I'm like, wow.
But
okay.
But their usage is seriously rare, though, isn't it? You're talking about the massive ordnance penetrator,
yes.
Right?
But what I'm saying is that even though people knew that it was a capability that would be useful, and that the bombs themselves, I mean, the expense in that system are that a test target is like $40 million to build the bunker that you're trying to destroy, right? So that the expense there is not in the 30,000-pound chunk of steel. It's really the target to test the bomb against. And so that's why the program costs are a little bit higher. But what I'm saying is, on too many of these things, we find out that we have boutique quantities of some of these capabilities that we need, and it's sort of weird. Like I would have imagined we would have had more than 20 of those bombs. Let me put it that way.
Well, maybe that's why your fearless leader is expanding the empire to Greenland to just bomb those mountains or something.
I'm not going to weigh into what the president is thinking at any given time, but I'm just talking about the fact that there are things we know we need, and there are things that we do not do. That Indo-Pacific, I remember Admiral Davidson talking about capabilities he needed that his predecessor 10 years earlier had said was a top priority, and it was still trickling in. And when your Indo-Pacific commander says, hey, I need this weapon, I need this missile, I need a pier extension in Guam in order for me to be able to do this stuff, and it's not happening, then it suggests to your adversary you're not serious. That's to me the bigger issue. You have to always consider and to show your adversary you are serious, and that when they dig deep in anything you're doing, they understand and you're telegraphing it's serious. Otherwise, deterrence fails when they think you're not serious, that you will not go to war over Taiwan, or that you don't have the long-range weapons, that I'm the one who has all the long-range weapons and you don't. And that's where it starts to become problematic. And by the way, they can count. Your adversary can count. So if he counts and says, I have X number of stuff I can throw at you, and you have a finite amount of ways to defend yourself against that, some of this are simple calculations, right? And by the way, they're simple calculations the Germans should have easily been able to make in World War II, right? Like, we can't win this, right? And so what's the number one thing that autocracies do? They miscalculate. It doesn't matter if you're Japan. It doesn't matter if you're Germany. It doesn't matter if you're Vladimir Putin. You miscalculated.
And they lie. They lie to their leaders to save face and to advance.
Correct.
Yeah. Which we are hoping is still the case, because most of our adversaries are autocracies, and we would love for that to still be the case, right? That they still, at least in the army, are more inefficient than like paper tigers, because the real leadership isn't there and the expertise and so forth.
we need to get serious about fielding capabilities. I mean, again, to give credit to the administration, we need to field capability more quickly, more economically, and do it fast. I mean, it is important. Nothing is going to be a better deterrent than your adversaries seeing, wow, they're filling up these magazines really quickly. They're not getting wrapped around bureaucratic axles. They're getting multiple sources doing it, right? And the respect for intellectual property is very important. But when the Pentagon effectively owns the intellectual property to a lot of these things because they underwrote the development of it, it's time to be able to say, okay, you know what? Danny, Vago, Peter, and Sophie are all going to be making this. Okay, it's no longer Vago's monopoly on this, and he's making these in boutique quantities. And oh, by the way, what are the design things we can do to make this? You mean to tell me there are 6 kind of over engineered bits and pieces that is gumming up the supply chain? Get them out, and that's one of the things they're saying is, hey, look, these single points of failure, we got to get rid of them to be able to build stuff and build stuff more quickly, use heritage
Yes.
companies, new economy companies in order to try to do this. Now, I would try to do this together with allies and partners, but at the end of the day, they have to trust you, right? So if we're on one side and they're on the other side, that makes doing that a little more complicated and it'll be a little more wasteful, ultimately.
Yeah. That attitude, at least, was admirable to get rid of government inefficiency, which this administration in America was very big on, including a certain tech billionaire and so forth. I think that, that sentiment is agreeable, that, as you're saying, we need to get this stuff working quicker. I wanted to pivot into defense business. So for the last couple of years, there was big news about Boeing. Jets were falling out of the sky and doors were coming off and whatever. And I don't know, in a nutshell, they had moved away from excellent engineering to making money. That was the story. So where is Boeing now? And are they still like a big defense contractor? Did they lose any reputation, face, anything? Where are they now?
Look, I mean, great companies sometimes have a turn in the barrel. We've seen, there was a time when Lockheed wasn't able to deliver, and we've seen Raytheon not be able to do it, and unfortunately we saw Boeing go through that. I think that Kelly Ortberg and his team deserve credit for trying to put the train back on the tracks, to try to get back to the blocking, the tackling, the engineering, having the right people in the right jobs, doing the right things. And, this is going to be a time-consuming thing, but I think that, there's more confidence in the company. It won the F-47 contract, could end up winning the FAXX contract. I mean, Boeing was said that they can't screw in a light bulb, and there's no way they're going to beat Lockheed Martin, and they beat Lockheed Martin, and they beat Northrop, to win the U.S. Air Force's premier 6th-generation combat aircraft competition. The Air Force liked what it saw. The Air Force did not like what it saw coming out of Lockheed. They felt like it was a little bit of a warmed over design, and they felt like Boeing really was pulling out all the stops and impressed them. We'll see how it works. I mean, the proof of the pudding is whether or not an airplane can be delivered and operate smoothly. I mean, I got to tell you, Northrop deserves some kind of award because they're delivering on B-21 and it's hitting each one of its marks, right? So that's pretty good. Looks like we're going to order even more of those airplanes. So God willing, Boeing can demonstrate that it can't just win contracts, but it's going to deliver on them. I mean, the biggest issue they had on the defense side, Danny, was they would win work and then screw it up on execution, right? They won the tanker, but they weren't able to deliver tankers that could do the job. They won the T-7 contract for a trainer, but then sort of fouled things up with the trainer. They won the unmanned refueling aircraft for the Navy, but then had trouble being able to execute against that. So, we'll see whether or not they're going to be able to deliver on these contracts ultimately. But I mean, I think that there's a sense that it's a company that's got its spring in its step is back. And we'll see what happens on FAXX, right? I mean, there's a sense that that's Northrop's to lose, But I wouldn't be surprised if Boeing ends up winning that as well, which would make it certainly very interesting. So I do think leadership matters, and this leadership at the company is focused on addressing what its shortcomings were in a methodical fashion. That's at least my sense.
Good. And we're not rooting for any like specific company here, but I think commonsensically, without knowing as much as you know about this industry, I think we need them all to do any of the things amazing things you explained about what we need to get better at. We need all of these, right? And the competition that's our strength as the liberal Western world, right? So losing an actor is like a newspaper going bankrupt. You lose a voice, you know?
I would agree with you that we need as much of the high-end capability as well as and I don't mean this pejoratively, lower-end capability. And indeed, again, I mean, the administration is talking about bringing in commercial suppliers to be able to build things in volume that, can be very sophisticated. And, I mean, I've made this case for General Motors in the past. I mean, that's a company that knows how to make things in quantity. Okay. Are there other companies like that we can bring into the defense tent to help us? Because in World War II, it took Consolidated to design the B-24. It took Ford to re-engineer the airplane to make it producible. And because of Ford, we made 18,000 B-24s in World War II. 18,000.
That's
But it would
incredible.
never have happened if Ford had not brought its production expertise to that problem to fix it. And so I think those are the kinds of things that we can and should be doing alliance-wide to harness these capabilities, because our democracies depend on. By the way, just one last thing I wanted to say. The industry is responding to the incentives that exist for it now. Change the incentives, you will get different behavior from the contractors. So everybody likes to beat up the contractors, but at the end of the day, they're operating within the incentive structure you've created. Change the incentive structures. Move the cheese, as the Brits would say. And depending on how you move the cheese and where you apply electricity and where you apply the reward, you will get the industry moving in whatever direction you want it to go.
Excellent. And yes, and it's not their fault sometimes for building, if they do build crap. They build what was ordered.
Well, it's very, very little of it is crap. I mean, I have to tell you, I am in awe with how consistently well, Patriot, it's not going to be able to intercept hypersonic weapons. Well, guess what? It's intercepting hypersonic weapons, right? So, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that these systems are able to do. They're expensive and they work. The jury is out on whether or not the new generation of startup guys will be able to deliver stuff that works, right? I mean, that's the outstanding question, because at the end of the day, lives depend on all of this stuff working. So,
Yeah. Excellent. I know I've taken lots of your time. Quick, more fun, rapid fire.
Sure.
The icebreaker deal, Finland, US. I understand that some of the icebreakers are going to be built in Galveston, Texas, and I am fascinated by the cultural clash that will happen when Texan cowboys meet some Finnish engineers. What do you think is going to happen there? Is that where World War III potentially really breaks
I
out?
think it's going to be great. Texas is a great state. It's got really great engineers. It's got defense heritage. I do think the question I would ask is it just smarter for the Finns to execute the whole contract, right? Is that actually smarter for us and better for everybody at the end of the day than stopping the program mid-stride and then moving it to the United States to facilitize and to create that capability here in the United States? There is a lot of engineering know-how Finnish shipbuilders have. I think Americans don't realize what a shipbuilding superpower Finland is, or Italy is, I mean, these massive cruise ships are made by Finns in 1 year. In 1 year.
As we have learned on this show, we had the head of the port of Helsinki on the show.
Right, which I think is breathtaking, and the Italians managed to do this, and if they're late on the ship, I mean, it's really punitive. Meyer Werft, same thing with the Germans who build some of these larger ships as well, and of course the Koreans, Chinese, and of course Japanese as well, who are in the business. So I mean, at a certain point, given it's such a boutique and unique ship with a unique bunch of capabilities you need, I would almost be inclined to say, hey, you're building 6 of these things, just build them in Finland and deliver them from Finland, as opposed to, or 7 of them. I think we're doing, instead of doing 4 and 3 and stuff like that. I think it becomes could potentially become unworkable. But can you bring anybody up to speed? You certainly could bring anybody up to speed, whether they're in Texas or New York, California, or Alabama.
Yeah. Another more fun one. Current book you're reading, because we all are assuming it's something very non-fiction and something very important, what we should all be reading.
It is. I have a couple of them. I'm going to reread the Federalist Papers, right? I mean, we're now going into the 250th anniversary of the United States. So it's going to be, it's a period that I've utterly been fascinated with. And so, remember the spirit of 76 and the bicentennial. So I'm going to be rereading a whole bunch of great stuff from the past. But I mean, one of the books that I'm reading now is The Death of Expertise, because I am fascinated as somebody who has always sought out expertise. And it's not to say experts can't be wrong, but I admire and appreciate talking to somebody who has deep expertise in an area and try to learn from them and sort of be like, okay, well, how to think about problems, or what does a solution look like? The progress we've made, whether it's in medicine or science or AI or anywhere else, is expertise at work. And so I'm fascinated with how, whether it's the rise of social media, new mores, and the like, where that it puts everybody sort of on the same plane, and somebody who knows nothing about something begins to argue with you with a fervor that is sort of extraordinary to me. So I'm fascinated by that. I know you're good friends with Peter Pomerantsev. He's done just some incredible work as somebody who's in the information, disinformation, misinformation, or at least is in the information space and sees how information is used and misused. I'm also fascinated by, the shape this is taking to, because if nothing is true, everything is possible, right? And so for bad ideas to take hold and really gain popular traction, you have to destroy expertise, ultimately, those people who will say, well, wait a minute, that's insane. And I will tell you, whatever mistakes and whatever else the Chinese are doing, the Chinese are at least believing in expertise, even if it's misused there, right? At the end of the day, they've taken all of the lessons from the United States and the Cold War, the creation of virtuous cycles, to create a technological, engineering, scientific juggernaut that is at base built on expertise. And I think that the party recently has gotten smart enough to make sure not to kill a golden goose it's been grooming. It's not to say that experts can't make mistakes, but I'm fascinated with how, in each one of these turns, the experts that are critical for our advancement are steadily being targeted, whether it's in medicine, whether it's in broader science, whether it's in climate, whether it's in any one of these other fields that will be important to us.
Yeah. Well, there certainly we'll jot down those books, and that sounds fascinating. I mean, that's obvious. Get your kids off TikTok and put them into STEM. Get some expertise in them. I agree with that sentiment. I wanted to ask you personally, long career in defense journalism, national security. Most impressive person you got to interview?
Wow. Boy. I mean, Andy, the late great Andy Marshall, I had an enormous amount of respect for somebody as accomplished and as smart and as insightful. He was somebody who's very, very comfortable in saying, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. And in Washington, that is very, very rare, that somebody would say that they don't know.
He was like a real giant.
He was
just
a giant.
Did you ever meet Kissinger?
Yes, many times. And, formidable intellect. I mean, I think that generation of him, Scowcroft, Brzezinski, and others were people who I, certainly admire. I think Brzezinski doesn't sometimes get his due. I think was a book this year about Brzezinski, actually, that I haven't had a chance to read that I would like to, because he was also, I think, a very, very decent man. I had a lot of respect for General Scowcroft as well, who I knew better, certainly, than a couple of the other leaders. George Shultz was another, somebody I consider a giant, somebody who kind of knew how to get things done, sort of was there, at an important time in the Cold War, and somebody who right until the end was somebody who was just absolutely razor sharp. Folks say the same thing about Bill Perry. He and George Shultz would show up at meetings and things, and folks were like, "Oh wow, these guys are in their mid 90s," and they ended up being folks who were completely sharp and on their game. I don't know. I mean, Danny, it's hard to say. I mean, I look at each engagement as a way to learn, and you find fascinating things about people.
Except this one.
I find very many fascinating things with you as well, and I think you thoughtfully try to sell. You're self-deprecating, but I think there's an enormous intellect also that you bring to the table.
Wow.
So I've been very impressed with our conversations, Danny. So
I'm right up there with Marshall and Kissinger. Did you ever meet Stormin Norman Schwarzkopf?
I did not. I did not meet Schwarzkopf.
He's one of the few who didn't live an exceptionally long life. All of these great strategists, for some reason, live until they're 100, and he didn't. So
he did not. But did meet my share of legendaries, certainly on the aviation side of things, but as well as on Navy and ground, which were honors. So yeah, you were around long enough, and I always took the opportunity to try to interview as many interesting people as I could. So
yeah, this final one we can cut out if it offends you or if it's a problem. But I have to ask, how do serious people in Washington today feel about the things that the pilots are seeing in the sky that they don't know what they are? Jet fighters.
Look, could they be from another world? They could be. But all I will tell you is the SR-71 was able to fly, cruised at Mach 3 above 80,000 feet 60 years ago. Okay? That's all I'm telling you.
My favorite airplane, by the way, of all time.
It's right up there as among my favorites as well. But you know what I mean? We've got a lot of capability, and our adversaries have capabilities, and so not everything might be from another planet. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
I know of capabilities we have that are pretty amazing, and when you mosaic this stuff together.
Yeah, and they're certainly interesting, and the pilots aren't ridiculed anymore about it or anything. They're taken seriously when they report them, which is fascinating.
It is fascinating, but there is a delta between what folks know, what they don't know, and the capabilities that exist that are highly classified that only a small number of people know and that other people are exposed to. So, and I think if you're an alien, I somewhat subscribe to Stephen Hawking's admonition, like, be careful what you wish for, because the colonized planet, like the colonized never end up in better shape in some ways, right? So beaming our message to the rest of the universe, we're here, they might think we're tasty.
Yeah, interesting. Hey, I'm happy that you answered that, and that I don't know. I think I would have been a little disappointed if you had just shut that down and said that, oh, we don't talk about this in Washington. I mean, it's
no. I mean, I think more people are saying that there's something is happening, and we should take these people seriously. And by the way, a lot of very serious people for a very long period of time would say that they were seeing things when they were flying around. Even astronauts saying, "Hey, I spotted something, and I don't know what that was." The fact that they said that they saw something. Okay, sometimes it was liquid oxygen, beads and, whatever, urine dump, and, it looked like a constellation of floating fireflies, outside the spacecraft. But, so you do take it seriously, you do investigate it. But I just have a sense that if it's aliens, they're going to be somewhat more dramatic. I'm not necessarily sure. They might have a prime directive not to, interfere with our society, but that also could just be Gene Roddenberry.
Yeah.
Like, if they make it all the way over here, they might wanna let us know they're here.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah, it's a fascinating conversation. I mean, we can do you are welcome anytime to come back, by the way. You can just call in and interrupt another guest. I don't care.
Oh, that's very kind of you, man.
Oh, I almost forgot. We've promised another guest many months ago and the listeners that I would ask you about the Razzle Dazzle ship. Is that ever coming back, and why not? It was so fun. The striped naval vessel that was like black and white tiger striped to fool radars back in the...
Okay, so I have no idea whether we're gonna go back to Dazzle paint jobs. That stuff sort of worked in World War One, or maybe even didn't work in World War One because we didn't really we used this sort of in World War Two as well. I have absolutely no idea. In a radar, in a future with the kind of sensing that we have, I'm not necessarily sure we're gonna end up with dazzle striping or anything else that's going to be, I think we're going to be moving to paint schemes and coatings and surface effects that will make things much, much harder to see, as opposed to really cool looking pink, black, white, baby blue stripes all over a ship. That's my bet.
We look forward to it. I will say something here and I'll give you the final word. I'll tell everyone this is the most important public service announcement I've ever made on the show. Learn how the world really works. A piece of it. I'm sure you have your favorite banking podcast and your favorite agricultural food production podcast, but this one is an important one. Defense and Aerospace Report, and Vago also does other stuff, AI, an Air Force one, and a shipping one. The ship one is great as well. I listened to that. Cava ships, that's associated. So I'll put all the links in the description. Go listen to the Defense and Aerospace Report. Make that part of your routine. It's opened my eyes to loads of things. And thank you so much, Vago, for a lovely, huge chunk of your time. Do you have anything you want to say? Final thoughts?
Danny, thanks very much for the terrific plug. I'm honored that you're a listener, and I'm just honored to be on this show with you. It's a pleasure. Would love to reciprocate and have you come on so that the audience can see some of the chops that you bring to the table again in your self-effacing way. There's a lot about the world that we still haven't discussed, and I think your unique background is well suited for it. Right? I mean, you're a Finn who served in the IDF, who's now, in the UK, and just have an ability and a facility to be able to talk about everything from technology to strategy. So would love to have you come on and talk about some of those things so that our audience learns from you as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vago.